And yet, if you look at its employee base, it is 95% plus Indian, well, 90% plus Indian. This was the organization's first attempt to try and figure out, okay, how do we work more effectively across different cultures? And having watched the results of some of the meetings, let's just say it's a learning process that's still an ongoing learning process. And then finally, from TCS's perspective, the whole idea was to try and see if the kinds of delivery performance parameters that they were talking about in India could in fact be achieved elsewhere, because you could see why from their perspective this would be a game changer. It would allow them to, in some sense, decouple their business strategy from just continued availability of software personnel in India in a way that might really charge global growth. So lots of examples here, lots of effects here, and what I want to wrap up with is the notion that in general, though, when we think about the gains from trade, when we think about the gains from cross-border involvement, we focus just on the first two items of the list. I'm not saying this is an absolute tendency, but I am saying that this is a huge bias in terms of how, for instance, models calculating the gains from trade are actually put together. And what I'd like to suggest is that instead of just focusing on these sort of first two categories of gains, and even there the treatment tends to be incomplete because it underemphasizes economies of scale and possible capacity utilization improvements, is that we really need to think much, much more broadly about some of these other factors if we're really going to be able to make a case, or the best possible case that we can, for trade. So with that, I think the 25 minutes I was supposed to speak for in this initial session are up, so let me just end with a recap. Talked about three things. First of all, understanding how global we are, because if we think we're already 100% global, we could just, spend the rest of these 2 days going around Chongqing and, really understanding the city as opposed to thinking about the broader issues facing the global economy. Second, understanding all the barriers that constrain trade, because I argue that a full understanding of these barriers expands the policy space. And third, really thinking broadly about the gains from trade so as to be able to figure out not just what the opportunity is, but what exactly we stand to gain if we actually take advantage of this opportunity. So with that, let me close my remarks, and thank you again for listening to me. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I think there's food for thought. If we looked at the first slide and were not so optimistic, I think basically you ended your presentation with showing us just how many options we actually have and how much more room there is to grow. So can I first then ask Dr. Supachai, would you like to give some thoughts? And you have microphones right beside you. And then Pascal, if you would after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. Professor Ghemawat's expose of the way we look at the process of openness and globalization is really all-encompassing. I would say in a very integrated manner. It's the way Angtat would express the way we looked at the world. And I would like to just say a few words in support of this way of looking at things at the global level, because if you don't look at the global process of linking everyone together on an integrated basis, you can always easily be misled, because many efforts in the world sometimes tend to be not narrow-minded, but short-sighted. Now, I don't have to come back to quote this dead horse all the time, which is the issue of short-sightedness in the financial areas. At the outset, Patricia was talking about our long-term thinking. And as much as everyone, all business managers and politicians know about the long-term thinking, it's not always easy to put this long-term thinking into the way they manage their own businesses. If you talk to politicians, their horizon is maybe to the next election. And not for the next 10 years, although they might be making plans for the next 10 years. For business managers, they may be looking at the bottom line, profits, bonuses, and not really the long-term value of what they are doing to the rest of the world. So I think it has a lot of value, and while we are bogged down with all sorts of negotiations, we're not only being stalled by our complicated negotiation in trade area. If you imagine our negotiation in other areas like climate change, it's even more complicated than trade areas, and we're bogged down with that kind of negotiation. Again, if we would think in a short-term manner, if we would think only of climate as such, or if we would think only of our region or our nation as such. Because the thing that Professor Ghemawat was trying to tell us that this is something that is just beyond trade per se, that could be calculated in a tangible manner. It's more than only tangible benefits that one should be looking at when one tries to open up the global economy. It's just getting to know each other. I think our friend Bo Xilai said so well yesterday. He said, when we meet each other for the first time, we are strangers. For the second time, we become old friends. And for the third time, a partnership is formed. And what we want, actually, for the world to be taken on to globalization in a most beneficial way is for the partnership to be formed. And I would link this back to the things that the UN has been trying to do, that of all the MDG goals, most of them, of the 8 goals, 6 and 7 of them are related to social goals. One goal is related to partnership in development. And this is because of our understanding with our 192 nations, that you cannot have globalization that can float all the boats. As Kofi Annan used to say some years ago, there's been some forms of globalization has sunk some of the smaller boats and lifted only the big yachts, the bigger boats, the yachts. So I think there are two sides to what Professor Ghemawat has been trying to relay to us, and I think we should take some lesson from it, and I would just add a few comments from Ang That's side. The first lesson is that this is an integrated picture. An equilibrium model that would capture only the changes in volume, and on the cost side with the reduction in tariffs would not capture all the gains from openness or globalization. And I think fully subscribe to this. But at the same time, for thinking along this line, I would like to put in there also that the heterogeneity of the processes that go to making the whole globalization process will have to be taken into account. Globalization for China is one thing. Globalization for Lesotho is another thing. And globalization maybe for Argentina is another thing altogether. And in it, again, I would like to emphasize, we have to talk about what Patricia started off with sustainability. Ang That began to raise the issue of globalization with a human face certain years ago. We raised many things that people never listened. We raised issue on financial imbalances for years. Nobody listened to us. Since a few years, we raised the issue of globalization with a human face. Exactly what Professor Ghemawat has been trying to show to us, that even culture counts. When you speak the same language, you come from the same region, it might be easier to trade. But this is not everything for sure. But again, to emphasize the fact that globalization is an integrated process that we have to take into account heterogeneity. It's not the same thing for everyone. And trade counts, finance counts, but investment also counts. So all these areas are interconnected. The second side of this picture is that while you are looking at all this, and it seems, I mean, I don't know whether Professor Ghemawat would like us to look at it that way, but it seems a bit on the optimistic side when we look at the way we can expand the